One of the strongest Category 5 hurricanes on record, Hurricane Melissa, slammed into Jamaica on Tuesday as a Category 4, with winds topping 185 miles per hour. As of this moment, most communications with the island is down, but a ray of sunshine. Jamaica's capital, Kingston, seems to have been spared the brunt of the storm. Its airport could be open by Thursday for disaster relief to be flown in. Melissa hit Jamaica at around 5 p.m. Tuesday night and quickly degraded to a Category 4. Prime Minister Andrew Holness has declared the country a disaster area. The New York Times reporting 75 patients inside Jamaica's Black River Hospital had to be evacuated. 500,000 people in Jamaica are now without power. The storm smacked into Cuba early Wednesday as a Category 3. 750,000 people on that island were evacuated. The BBC reporting that the frequency of hurricanes this century is no different than the previous century, but the average intensity of hurricanes now has increased. The average hurricane now is a 3, Category 3. According to the BBC, hurricanes now move slower. This is due to warmer oceans sending up more evaporation into the clouds, making those clouds heavier. They turn into hurricanes, which become slower because they're heavier, and they pack more moisture when they hit landfall. Remember, warmer water causes hurricanes to become massive. The burning of fossil fuels traps the greenhouse gases, which raises the temperatures of our oceans. So our nation's top priority, one would think, would be getting off fossil fuel. Our nation's top priority, one would think, would be using our military to get relief to the people living in Jamaica, Cuba, and other parts of the Bahamas hit by that storm. Instead, Donald Trump thinks global warming is a hoax, and our real problem, imaginary terrorists from Venezuela flooding our border to murder, rape, deal drugs, and kidnap. So while our military is building up in and around Jamaica, instead of helping, it's preparing for a land invasion of oil-rich Venezuela, which has the most proven oil reserves on the planet, more than even Saudi Arabia. Pete Hegseth, our alcoholic defense chief, whose own mother put into writing that he is a serial abuser of women, announced that your tax dollars were spent on yet another airstrike on alleged drug dealers, this time in the Pacific, and it's reportedly the deadliest of the 13 ordered so far. This one ended up with 14 dead, 4 ships hit, bringing the total killed to more than 57 since these airstrikes began. One quote-unquote narco-terrorist reportedly survived and is being held by Mexico because that's how war always works. When you attack terrorists or enemy combatants and they survive, you allow a third party like Mexico to grab them and interrogate them. I mean, why would our military want an enemy combatant? Why would we want to interrogate that enemy combatant? Why would we want to get any information out of them? That's not how war works. And of course, there won't be a trial. The president of Mexico, according to the New York Times, saying while her country's Navy performed the search and rescue for that lone survivor, she didn't approve of the airstrikes. Mary Ellen O'Connell, who teaches military law at Notre Dame and inside the Defense Department, telling the BBC, quote, "Criminal suspects are entitled to due process." She added, "It is a greater crime to summarily execute people suspected of drug trafficking than drug trafficking is," unquote. Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro, accused Trump of, quote, "fabricating a new war." The Associated Press reporting that for 16 months, going back to the Biden administration, Maduro's personal pilot was courted by our CIA to flip and divert one of the Venezuelan president's flights to a landing strip where he could then be arrested by the United States. Maduro was indicted by the U.S. Attorney for Lower Manhattan back in 2020 on charges of leading one of South America's largest drug cartels. The Associated Press reporting that one CIA agent almost got Maduro's personal pilot to betray the Venezuelan president, with some estimates that he was offered $50 million to deliver Maduro to federal agents. Eventually, Maduro's pilot turned the CIA down. His final text to that CIA agent reading, quote, "We Venezuelans are cut from a different cloth. The last thing we are is traitors." That story was broken Tuesday by the Associated Press. Phil Stewart from Reuters reporting that as the military strikes increase on suspected Venezuelan drug dealers, all Pentagon officials working on those attacks have been asked to sign non-disclosure agreements. The number of Pentagon employees ordered to sign NDAs is in the thousands, as high as 5,000. This, as Pete Hegseth already subjects an unprecedented number of employees inside the Pentagon, this we're talking about in the thousands, to surprise polygraph tests, attempting to crack down on leaks. These non-disclosure agreements are a redundancy because if a mission is top secret or classified, Pentagon officials are already sworn to keep it under wraps. The Miami Herald reporting on Monday that Venezuela claimed to have captured CIA-trained mercenaries planning to attack a U.S. warship and then attempting to create a false flag operation that would justify an American land invasion. Reuters reporting Venezuelan Foreign Minister Ivan Gil says the plan called for mercenaries to blow up a guided missile destroyer named the USS Gravely docked in nearby Trinidad. If you've listened to this show, you know I've been out front reminding Americans that Venezuela has the largest known oil reserves on the planet. Hundreds of billions, more than Saudi Arabia. My listeners also know that Venezuela nationalized its oil production back in 2007 with Exxon, ConocoPhillips, and several other oil and mining interests claiming Venezuela seized tens of billions of dollars worth of their assets and refuses to return them. So I've been somewhat dubious that any of this is about stemming the flow of drugs into our country, especially since Venezuela is one of the minor players in the South American cocaine and fentanyl drug trade. Now, new video has emerged from the 2024 campaign in which Donald Trump promised that when he returned to the Oval Office, he would make sure Venezuela collapsed so that the United States could take its oil. Here is newly discovered video of Trump last year out on the campaign trail, criticizing the Biden administration for deciding to replace Russian oil by purchasing it from Venezuela.
How about we're buying oil from Venezuela? When I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil. It would have been right next door.
We're coming up on the 10th anniversary of the Paris Climate Accords, which the United States was a party to when Obama was president. Then Trump became president. We left the accords. Biden became president. We went back in. And now with Trump's return, we're no longer signatories to this international pact calling for reducing the Earth's temperature to pre-industrial revolution levels. Next month is the 30th Climate Change Conference of the nearly 198 signatories. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres with some ominous words in the lead up to this big gathering. Guterres now saying, quote, "It's inevitable that the world will overshoot the temperature limit, bringing devastating consequences." Guterres said the world must change course now because humanity has missed the 1.5 Celsius climate target. Well, greenhouse gases, he said, have to be reduced by 60% over the next 10 years to make sure we don't heat the planet by an additional 1.5 Celsius, which is generally agreed to be the tipping point. Guterres saying the world is on track to reduce greenhouse gases by only 10%. And of course, the past decade has been the hottest on record. According to the Supreme Court, corporations are people, and that means Exxon is entitled to free speech, just like you and me, which is why Exxon, one of the world's leading emitters of greenhouse gases, sued California for violating its free speech rights. According to the Los Angeles Times, a series of laws passed in California, known as the Climate Accountability Package, mandates that fossil fuel companies doing business in California, like Exxon, must report their carbon emissions and the estimated financial impact those emissions will have on the state. Failure to comply would result in financial penalties. Exxon just sued to block these laws, which are scheduled to go into effect next year. Lawyers for Exxon claim that forcing Exxon to disclose that kind of information is forced speech, thereby violating that corporation's First Amendment rights. The Guardian reporting the Security and Exchange Commission under Joe Biden was working on climate change disclosure rules for all publicly traded corporations, but Trump's Securities and Exchange Commission this year threw out all those proposed mandates. This is the Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you for finding me. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. Subscribe to my newsletter and, of course, this channel. Help me out by sharing this episode. Donald Trump now calling reports false that he's planning to name the East Wing's new $300 million addition the President Donald J. Trump Ballroom. Yeah, that would be kind of silly since he's already named it the Trump White House. Trump aboard Air Force One heading to Asia telling reporters he'd love to run for a third term. Trump ruled out a possible workaround to the 22nd Amendment where he would run for vice president. Trump saying he's the king, not the queen. Then on the final leg of the trip, he said, yep, I can't run. He admitted he can't run. We'll see. Trump also told reporters that a Republican ticket to J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio would be, quote, an unstoppable duo. Trump added, again, it's too bad. I can't run for a third term because I have the best numbers ever. Well, Trump's former campaign manager, Steve Bannon, insists Trump is running in 2028, and after next year's midterms, plans will be unveiled for a legal workaround to the 22nd Amendment. There's the U.S. Constitution, and there's also Trump's Constitution, which he's spent a lifetime violating, living on a diet of Big Macs, fries, and Adderall. Trump admitted to having an MRI earlier this month for his second physical this year. His bruised hands and cankles seen here. You can see the ankle flab drooping over his shoes suggests that his chronic venous insufficiency, where blood pools at the bottom of his leg, getting worse. This was revealed back in July, and there's also the issue of why Trump's hands require makeup to conceal bruising, which his doctor claims is caused by taking aspirin and too much handshaking. On Tuesday, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson was asked if he'd support a third Trump term. Johnson said, quote, well, it's been a great run, but I think the president knows, and he and I have talked about the constrictions of the Constitution. As much as so many of the American people lament that, I don't see a way to amend the Constitution because it takes about 10 years to do that, so I don't see the path for that, unquote. We'll see. The New York Times reporting that Donald Trump often jokes about how obedient Mike Johnson is, with the Trump White House often telling insiders, quote, Trump is the speaker and the president. That's the joke inside the White House, that Donald Trump is the Speaker of the House and the president. Well, as for those poll numbers Trump claims are the best ever, not so much. Jason Lang, writing for Reuters, says a new 3-day poll from Reuters and Ipsos shows Trump's numbers at their lowest since he returned to the Oval Office. Only 40% of Americans approve of the job Trump's doing, with most complaining he hasn't tackled the rising cost of living. New inflation numbers for September show prices climbing at an annualized rate of 3%. It is generally agreed that one of the chief reasons Trump won last year was due to Americans blaming Democrats for inflation, which reached the highest rate in nearly 4 decades while Biden was in office. But inflation was coming down during the final years of the Biden administration. Since Trump took office and started with the tariffs, the rate of inflation is going back up. The rate of inflation now is higher than it was when Trump returned to office. A new Associated Press poll showing that only 25% of Hispanic voters now approve of the job Donald Trump is doing. In November of last year, Trump got nearly half their vote. I wonder why. As more polls show his approval rating underwater, Trump keeps taking to social media, insisting his poll numbers that are underwater are all fake. Well, all the poll numbers show you underwater, so all the polls are fake. NBC News reporting that former Vice President Kamala Harris says she might run for president again in 2028. On October 7th, an NBC poll showed Harris with an approval rating of 32% compared to Trump's 40% approval rating from Reuters. So that's the thing. Whenever you look at how bad Trump is doing, you have to ask compared to whom, and he's doing better than Kamala Harris. Harris ran in 2020, dropped out in 2019. She didn't even make it to the Iowa caucuses. Last year, she received 6 million fewer popular votes than Biden got in 2020. She got 80 fewer electoral votes, but she says she's thinking of running again. California Governor Gavin Newsom said he will decide on his plans for 2028 sometime after next year's midterms. Newsom is going to be term limited out of office as governor in January of 2027. Kamala Harris was considering a 2026 run for California governor, but decided against it earlier this year. Now, preliminary polling showed her leading the pack of all Democratic candidates, but she did seem to have some erosion of support among independents and Democratic voters of color. A New Hampshire poll of New Hampshire voters out Tuesday showing Pete Buttigieg, Biden's transportation secretary, leading the field of potential Democratic presidential nominees. Pete Buttigieg with 19% of the vote, Gavin Newsom at 15%, AOC 14%, and Kamala Harris at 11%. You might remember Buttigieg lost the 2020 New Hampshire primary to Bernie Sanders by 1 percentage point. New Hampshire was the first primary, traditionally, for the Democratic Party until 2024, when on Biden's insistence, it became South Carolina. In January of next year, the Democratic Party will decide on whether South Carolina will remain first. Next Tuesday is Election Day, and we're following races in California, Virginia, New York City, and New Jersey. In California, voters are expected to vote yes on Proposition 50 that, if passed, would temporarily give the democratically controlled state legislature authority to redraw congressional maps and create roughly 5 reliably blue House seats to cancel out the new, reliably red ones created by the Republican-controlled Texas state legislature. The Los Angeles Times reporting that Donald Trump is now claiming the vote on that in California is rigged. So Attorney General Pam Bondi announcing the Justice Department will be monitoring polling stations in California next week to make sure there's no fraud. There's also the possibility ICE agents will be standing outside voting precincts, which many think is a form of voter intimidation. Governor Gavin Newsom calls it voter suppression. Cal Matters reporting that Latinos in California have a long history of showing up to vote in person, but they now fear they're going to get hassled by ICE, and that might lower turnout for Latino voters or force them to vote by mail. Now, remember, they're arresting citizens, and then they're being released. And you think, oh, that's not so bad. Have you ever been arrested? Just because you're eventually released, that doesn't mean the 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, or 3 days in an ICE detention facility isn't traumatizing. Trump demanding that voters show up in person. He insists mail-in ballots can't be trusted. No doubt he plans on challenging the results in court. So he's saying to California Republicans, show up in person, don't use mail-in ballots. But New York Magazine reporting that Trump's call for people to show up in person runs counter to what the California Republican Party is encouraging Republicans to do, and that is vote by mail. There are a lot of older voters, Republican voters in California, who just would rather mail it in. Virginia on Tuesday will elect its first female governor. Democratic candidate Abigail Spanberger is expected to defeat Republican Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl Sears. Trump has failed to endorse Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl Sears. In fact, he snubbed her at the October 5th Norfolk, Virginia event celebrating the Navy's 250th anniversary. He failed to thank her for attending. In 2022, she called Trump a liability for the Republican Party, saying he shouldn't run again. That might be the reason Trump hasn't endorsed her, but a lot of people said that about Trump, and he ended up endorsing them. So, I wonder if her being black has anything to do with it, I said, dripping with sarcasm and contempt for our racist president. Virginia's 100 seats in its House of Delegates are also up for election next week. Democrats currently hold a 51-48 majority with one vacancy. Democrats also hold a 21-19 majority in the Virginia State Senate. Glenn Youngkin, the Republican governor, is being term limited out of office. We will pore over Virginia's results after Tuesday because many believe Virginia serves as a bellwether, a presidential report card, not just for the midterms, but the presidential race 3 years from now. I know a lot of my listeners disagree. They say we shouldn't pay attention to Virginia. I think we should. We are seeing record numbers showing up for early voting here in New York City, where the financial capital of the world is poised to elect a socialist for mayor. More than 223,000 ballots cast in the first 3 days of early voting. That's 50,000 more than the previous record for early voting in New York City. Zohran Mamdani leading in all the polls. On Sunday, Mamdani, alongside Bernie Sanders and AOC, filled the 13,000-seat Forest Hill Stadium in Queens. Governor Kathy Hochul, who's running for re-election, spoke at the rally but was booed, then drowned out as the crowd began shouting, "Tax the rich." Hochul waited months after Mamdani won the Democratic primary back in June before endorsing him on September 14th. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, who represents portions of New York City, finally endorsed Mamdani last Friday. So far, no endorsement from Chuck Schumer, also from New York. He's the Senate Minority Leader. Barack Obama has not endorsed Mamdani. Kamala Harris at first gave Mamdani a tepid endorsement. That was last month while she was appearing on the Rachel Maddow show. To Kamala Harris's credit, a few days later, she gave him a call and then gave Mamdani a much bigger endorsement, but hasn't appeared publicly with him. Andrew Cuomo, the disgraced former governor of New York, in a new Suffolk University poll, now trailing Mamdani by only 10 points. This could suggest the race is tightening, since that same poll a month ago showed Cuomo trailing by 20 points. Cuomo was forced to resign as governor of New York in 2021 under a cloud of sexual harassment and sexual assault accusations. In 2024, the United States Department of Justice under Merrick Garland concluded that as governor, Andrew Cuomo sexually harassed at least 13 female government employees who were then subjected to retaliation after they complained. That's according to the Biden Justice Department. New York State Attorney General Letitia James conducted her own investigation back in 2021 during the lead-up to Cuomo's resignation. New York State Attorney General Letitia James's office concluded Andrew Cuomo sexually harassed 11 women. That harassment, she said, included unwanted touching, hugging, and kissing. Well, I looked it up. In the state of New York, at the very least, that kind of behavior amounts to a Class A misdemeanor punishable by up to 1 year in jail. State Attorney General Letitia James also concluded that Cuomo created a hostile work environment. After Cuomo's 2021 resignation, several New York State district attorneys investigated those claims of sexual assault involving improper touching, but they failed to bring charges. By the way, New York State Attorney General Letitia James is also up for re-election next Tuesday. Last Friday, she pleaded not guilty after the U.S. Attorney for Virginia indicted New York State Attorney General Letitia James for mortgage fraud. That BS trial is scheduled for early 2026. Last year, James won a $500 million civil judgment against Donald Trump after a judge ruled the president defrauded banks and lenders by inflating his net worth in order to secure hundreds of millions of dollars in loans at favorable interest rates. The fine and the ruling are winding their way through the appeals courts. According to Politico, Business Insider, and the New York Times, billionaires and multimillionaires are donating big to Andrew Cuomo's campaign, including former mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, Barry Diller, Miriam Adelson, Steve Wynn, William Lauder, chairman of Estee Lauder, DoorDash, the food delivery service. They donated $1 million to Cuomo's super PAC. And a super PAC representing landlords named Housing for All donated $2.5 million to Andrew Cuomo. Housing for All, a super PAC representing landlords. Housing for All? You might remember Mamdani, among other things, is running on a rent freeze. Besides being a socialist, Mamdani is a Muslim. Not only that, but his parents are Indian and he was born in Uganda. Wait, it gets even better. He didn't become a United States citizen until 2018. And 2 years later, he was elected to the New York State Assembly. That's my America. So after he won the Democratic primary in June, Republicans started with birtherism, claiming Mamdani wasn't born in the United States. Guess what, you idiots? He wasn't born in the United States. He was born in Uganda. Donald Trump in July said he had reason to believe Mamdani was in our country illegally. Based on what? Mamdani's Muslim. After Mamdani's primary victory in June, Tennessee House Republican Andy Ogles called on Attorney General Pam Bondi to investigate Mamdani's citizenship, and then he called for Mamdani's citizenship to be stripped from him after he found out he was an actual citizen. By the way, the FBI is currently investigating Ogles over what has been described as a $1 million discrepancy involving his campaign finances. Florida House Republican Randy Fine called Mamdani the enemy within, accusing Mamdani of only becoming a U.S. citizen to destroy our country. And then there's sexual predator and disgraced former governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, who is trailing Mamdani by double digits. During a recent radio interview, Cuomo said, quote, of Mamdani's Muslim faith, quote, God forbid another 9/11. Can you imagine Mamdani in the seat if that happens? When the right-wing conservative host said Mamdani would cheer if New York got hit by another 9/11, the sexual predator and disgraced former governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, responded with, quote, that's another problem. Later, Cuomo said he was joking. Speaker Mike Johnson didn't waste a second diverting attention away from the government shutdown to attack House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries for Friday's belated endorsement of Zohran Mamdani for mayor of New York City. Calling Mamdani a Marxist insurgent, Johnson said Jeffries' endorsement was, quote, an illustration of what we're facing here, that the Democrats right now fear the far-left activists more than they fear Border Patrol agents and American service members. We're supposed to fear Border Patrol agents and American service members? Aren't they supposed to fear us? Also on Tuesday, voters in New Jersey will elect a new governor. Four-term U.S. House representative from New Jersey's 11th congressional district, Mikey Sherrill, is running against former Republican state assemblyman Jack Ciattarelli, who narrowly lost the race for governor 4 years ago to Democrat Phil Murphy, who is being term limited out of office. And look at that, 1 percentage point. Ciattarelli lost by 40,000 votes, but all the polls show Democratic candidate Mikey Sherrill winning by about 5 percentage points. That's kind of within the margin of error, but not quite. One outlier poll from Emerson last month showed the race a dead heat. The next Emerson poll comes out on Wednesday. A lot of people saying that Emerson poll back in September might have been contaminated by too many Republicans in it. But who knows? Mikey Sherrill is a woman. A year ago at this time, most polling showed a dead heat between Trump and Kamala Harris in the swing states, but it showed Harris leading by about 1.5% in the national vote. So we have a woman running for governor of New Jersey. Who knows? The government shutdown is primarily due to Democrats fighting Republicans on a provision in one big, beautiful bill that was passed back in July that would dramatically reduce Obamacare subsidies for lower-income Americans. Under Biden, those subsidies were temporarily enhanced, first through the American Rescue Plan in 2021, that was Biden's stimulus package, and then they were renewed, the enhancements were renewed under the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022. These enhancements are Obamacare subsidies given to people who are further up the economic ladder but can't afford Obamacare. The Republicans want to remove these Biden enhancements. They want to return to 2020 levels, despite health insurance costs up more than 25% since 2020. The Commonwealth Fund warning that if the Obamacare enhanced subsidies are removed, more than 7 million Americans above the poverty line could lose their health insurance. This is happening while health insurance costs spiral out of control. So this is why you should follow Tuesday, the New Jersey election, and Tuesday. Politico reporting that if the enhanced Obamacare subsidies are allowed to expire, New Jerseyans in 2026 can expect to pay nearly 175% more for health insurance on the Obamacare exchange. So for those of you who don't pay close attention to this, or if you're living overseas, the Obamacare exchange is for people who don't have employer-sponsored plans. The Obamacare exchange is for people who are self-employed, part-time workers, unemployed, on Medicaid. They work for a company without health benefits. They're nearing retirement. That's what the Obamacare exchange is for. Insurance carriers in New Jersey are expected to raise their premiums in 2026 by 16.6%. So without the enhanced subsidies, it is estimated a family of four living in New Jersey with an annual income of $131,000 with no employer-sponsored coverage, they will have to turn to the Obamacare marketplace. They will see a $26,000 increase in health insurance premiums. All in, they would be paying anywhere between $38,000 to $45,000 a year for health insurance. That's a family of four with an annual income of $131,000, where they have to go to the Obamacare marketplace. They could end up paying anywhere between $38,000 to $45,000 a year for health insurance. That's a $26,000 increase. Well, $38,000, $45,000 a year for a family, bringing in $131,000. That's what, 1/3 of their income going to health insurance? And if they rent, on average, half the annual salary goes to the landlord. Mike Johnson, the speaker, told reporters on Monday that the enhanced Obamacare subsidies must expire because the federal government can no longer subsidize bad policy. He said healthcare needs reform, and Republicans have a long list of policies that will make healthcare affordable. When asked for specifics, Johnson said, well, cracking down on Medicaid fraud. And of course, health benefits for undocumented immigrants. That's what's driving up healthcare costs, said the liar. Okay, according to most studies, Medicaid fraud exists, but it's not committed by recipients of Medicaid. According to a Georgetown University study, Medicaid fraud is committed by ambulance service providers, medical equipment companies, diagnostic labs, nursing homes, pain clinics, pharmacies, physical therapists, doctors, and substance abuse treatment providers. Many of those substance abuse treatment providers are owned by Bain Capital, Mitt Romney's company. According to Georgetown, it's not the beneficiaries of Medicaid who are committing fraud, but Republicans would never crack down on nursing homes, pain clinics, ambulance service providers. No, they're going to crack down on the beneficiaries of Medicaid, even though they don't commit fraud. So let me talk about the undocumented immigrants who Mike Johnson says are collecting Medicaid. They're not. He's a liar. He's a pathological liar. Under the 1996 Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act, undocumented immigrants pay taxes, they pay into Social Security, they pay into Medicare, but they are not entitled to any of it, and they're not entitled to Medicaid. Now, emergency rooms by law, this is a law going all the way back to Reagan, emergency rooms by law must provide medical care to anyone, regardless of who they are, how much money they have, whether they have insurance or not, whether they're tourists, undocumented, it doesn't matter. So there is such a thing as emergency Medicaid, which, according to Georgetown, constitutes less than 1% of Medicaid spending. So I have a question for Speaker Mike Johnson, who's a good Christian. He tells us he is, so he must be. Would he like to end emergency room Medicaid and just let the undocumented immigrants die? That's the question I would ask. The answer is yes. I'll talk about a debate that took place in 2012 among Republican candidates, hosted by CNN. And a lot of the candidates say, yeah, they should die. Marjorie Taylor Greene, of all people, says she's disgusted by the government shutdown. She says the speaker's decision not to cave in and let the enhanced Obamacare subsidies stay in effect, she says she's disgusted by that. She wants the Obamacare subsidies to continue. Greene said her constituents are calling her, worried that their premiums are about to triple. And she accused Mike Johnson of having no plan on how to fix health care in this country. Well, Marjorie, the sunsetting of the enhanced Obamacare subsidies, that was in one big, beautiful bill. Those cuts were in the bill that you voted for in July. Democrats are not allowing the new budget to go into effect because of this. Donald Trump, who has promised to get rid of Obamacare since he first ran for president, promised last year during his debate with Kamala Harris that he had, quote, concepts of a plan to replace Obamacare. He has no plan. He has concepts of a plan. The Republicans don't have a plan. Instead of health care, they offer vaccine skepticism. They put a lunatic, Bobby Kennedy, in charge. That's their plan. And it really is their plan. Bobby Kennedy, who said this week that Americans need to eat more saturated fat, which is one of the leading causes of heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. So the Republican plan to make health care affordable is convince low-income Republican voters who listen to low-information podcasts like Joe Rogan and Alex Jones, convince these people, trust me, you're better off without health care. That's the Bobby Kennedy gambit, convincing low-information, low-income Americans who are Republican, you're better off being skeptical and without going to a doctor. But Trump, he got his COVID shot, his flu shot. He's constantly going to doctors. But if you can't afford to see a doctor, the Republican message is, well, the medical establishment can't be trusted. You're better off not going to one. That's partly what all this anti-science quackery is about. Republicans don't have a health care plan, so they try to convince Americans who can't pay premiums they're better off without it. The reason Mike Johnson is cutting the Obamacare subsidies is that's one of the ways to pay for this massive tax cut Republicans gave the richest 1% last July when Trump signed one big beautiful bill into law. So that's one of the ways they're going to try to pay for this massive tax cut, by cutting hundreds of billions in Medicaid and food stamps, and of course, raising the debt ceiling by $5 trillion. This time around, they didn't even pretend cutting taxes for the rich would pay for itself. They used to say that. They used to, bring out the supply side economists who would claim tax cuts for the rich juice the economy, and that means more tax receipts. They're done spreading that lie. We know that's a lie. So now they're just saying, we're going to give the richest 1% a massive tax cut, and since we can't eliminate Medicare, Social Security, or Medicaid to pay for it, we're going to lift the debt ceiling by $5 trillion. And now, the party of fiscal responsibility, right? Thanks to them, our debt is about to be as bad as Italy and Greece's debt, the two black sheep of the European Union. Our national debt is now $38 trillion. And according to the International Monetary Fund, in 5 years, our national debt will be 143% of our entire economy. That debt to GDP ratio will exceed Italy's and Greece's. Take a look. There's a graph. This is the debt to GDP ratio going back to 1900. You see, during World War II, we racked up massive debt. Now we're approaching the same level of debt as we had in World War II. And we were fighting the Nazis back then like we are now. We are fighting the Nazis. I know we're not supposed to say that, but we are. NPR reporting that 2025 is turning out to be the deadliest year for immigrants held inside ICE detention facilities, the deadliest in more than 2 decades. Politico reporting members of Congress are now being told by ICE that due to the government shutdown, they are not allowed to inspect any of these ICE jails. The Department of Homeland Security saying its Office of Detention Oversight, which investigates conditions inside ICE jails, has been shut down until the government reopens. Congress told ICE is understaffed right now. They can't accommodate any congressional visitors. But MSNBC reporting that the Department of Homeland Security, despite this government shutdown, has millions to spend on television commercials begging people to come work for ICE. MSNBC reporting the commercials are not working, even though ICE is congressionally mandated to hire 10,000 more agents by January of next year. They can't fill the slots. John Paff is a professor of law at Fordham Law School. He writes over at MSNBC that in order to hire 10,000 ICE agents, they will need 500,000 applicants. He writes ICE has lowered the age requirement to 18. Yes, if you're 18, you can now go to work for ICE and work out all your unresolved rage issues. The problem, of course, is according to NBC News, half of applicants, half the people who want to work for ICE, have failed written tests on the Constitution and immigration law, even though the tests were open book. Open book tests mean they were allowed to look things up. And half the applicants failed the test, even though the Constitution and books on immigration law were in front of them. They still failed the open book tests. ICE agents, these are the applicants. Half of the people who want to be ICE agents couldn't pass an open book test. Well, despite it just gives you an idea of who wants to be an ICE agent, the worst of the worst. Despite border crossings, now the lowest since the early 70s, the Trump administration is frustrated by ICE's inability to maintain a deportation quota of 3,000 immigrants a day. That quota was imposed by Deputy White House Chief of Staff and homunculus Stephen Miller. There are now reports of a shakeup inside ICE, with at least 12 ICE field office directors replaced by Border Patrol officers. Border Patrol officers supposedly bring a more aggressive form of policing to the blue cities where Trump is staging his crackdowns. Border Patrol officers are way more proactive, and they consider themselves frontline responders, whereas your typical ICE agent lacks the skill set to do anything beyond terrifying innocent children and women. And that's that's a fact. It's a fact. ICE agents aren't trained to do real policing. And we're seeing that in Chicago and Los Angeles. They don't have proper training, which is why you hear reports of an ICE agent's gun accidentally discharging because he used the gun to crack open a car window belonging to a suspect he was trying to apprehend. That happened in Los Angeles last week. I'm following that story. You're looking at Gregory Bovino, who is a Border Patrol agent running the ICE crackdown in Chicago, known as Operation Midway Blitz, right? So he's, just so you know the hierarchy, he's a Border Patrol agent. He's tougher than an ICE agent. So he's running Operation Midway Blitz. He is an opportunistic infection. His social media platform features glamour videos of him and his fellow ICE agents in slow motion going up against violent protesters. He's using our tax dollars to distort the truth of what's actually going on in Chicago and Los Angeles. He was a presence in Los Angeles for Operation at Large. That's what they called the ICE invasion of Los Angeles. So Bovino gave an interview to WBEZ Chicago earlier this month. I talked about this. He explained that ICE agents know to arrest someone based on what he called articulable facts. And what are those articulable facts? What a person looks like. He literally said this. We talked about this about 2 weeks ago. He said ICE agents move in for their arrest based on the color of a suspect's skin and whether they speak English with a Latino accent. This is your country. Now, the Supreme Court over the summer issued a temporary order. This was temporary. They ruled that ICE agents, for the time being, can make arrests based on how people look. That's eventually going to be challenged before the Supreme Court. Earlier this month, U.S. District Judge Sarah Ellis, a Northern Illinois federal judge, issued a temporary restraining order forbidding ICE agents from firing tear gas at protesters, journalists, and members of the clergy. That was in the order. She said you can no longer fire tear gas at peaceful protesters, journalists doing their jobs, or members of the clergy. They're hitting rabbis and ministers. She specifically said ICE cannot use chemical agents on peaceful protesters. She wrote, if the ICE agent feels protesters have become unmanageable, that ICE agent must first provide the protesters with 2 clear warnings that that agent is about to fire a chemical agent. Last Thursday, as you can see from this picture, Greg Bovino, who's in charge of Operation Midway Blitz, well, he was caught in direct violation of that court order. He was caught on video lobbing a tear gas canister at protesters in the Little Village neighborhood of Chicago during an immigration raid. Video, and there are several videos of this, and they clearly indicate he never warned the protesters, who were in fact demonstrating peacefully. So Bovino was ordered to appear before Judge Ellis on Tuesday, where he said under oath, and I quote, "I understand what you are saying, Your Honor. We will abide by the temporary restraining order," unquote. WTTW, the PBS affiliate in Chicago, reporting that Judge Ellis then ordered Border Patrol Chief Greg Bovino to wear a body cam at all times from now on. Now, unlike Chicago police officers, ICE agents are not required to wear body cams. According to the Associated Press, Judge Sarah Ellis then ordered Bovino to meet with her at the end of each day at 6 p.m. to review ICE operations in the state of Illinois. Bovino responded, "Yes, ma'am." Judge Ellis ordered ICE agents to wear badges prominently displayed. That is not ICE's official policy, so we'll see how that plays out. Bovino agreed to undergo training on how to wear and deploy a body cam, and he promised to complete that training by Friday. ABC News reporting that Greg Bovino, he's running Chicago's Operation Midway Blitz. Bovino is boasting that his ICE agents have arrested 3,000 immigrants in Chicago since that crackdown began earlier this month. But investigative reporters for NBC5 Chicago say nobody can tell them what happened to the 3,000 immigrants that were arrested by ICE. NBC5 Chicago reporting lawyers representing some of those immigrants say the records for at least 3,000 jailed immigrants have completely vanished. Border czar Tom Homan on Tuesday defended Greg Bovino, calling him a patriot. Well, Mr. Homan, patriots who work for the government not only learn the Constitution, they swear an oath to protect it. So maybe he's not so patriotic. And you might want to try obeying the Constitution. And by the way, did you keep the $50,000, Tom Homan? We know FBI undercover agents handed Tom Homan a paper bag filled with $50,000 in cash last year, and Homan promised to get them contracts in a future Trump administration. Now, when Trump returned to the Oval Office, Trump killed that investigation. But nobody will tell us what happened to the $50,000. Did Tom Homan declare it on his taxes? Did he return it? Tell us, Tom Homan, what happened to the $50,000. By the way, this is an actual photo of border czar Tom Homan conducting a surprise inspection of the women's shower room at one of Geo Group's for-profit detention facilities down near the border. And workers at Chicago slaughterhouses learned this week that America's beloved border czar Tom Homan will cancel an ICE raid if the owner of the processing plant lets him spend 20 minutes alone with a pig. Well, anyway, back to Judge Sarah Ellis. She had Greg Bovino, who's running Operation Midway Blitz. She had him in the court on Tuesday, and she turned to the issue of ICE agents in Chicago over the weekend, spraying tear gas at costumed children marching at a Halloween parade in Chicago's northwest side. The parade coincided with ICE agents grabbing a suspect, and as parents gathered to observe the arrest, ICE agents fired tear gas canisters to break up the mob, and the kids inhaled the chemical agents. According to the Associated Press, an angry Judge Ellis said to Greg Bovino, who is supervising ICE's operation in Chicago, this is what Judge Ellis said to Greg Bovino, quote, "Those kids were tear gassed on their way to celebrate Halloween in their local school parking lot." She went on to say, "And I can only imagine how terrified they were. These kids, you can imagine, their sense of safety was shattered on Saturday, and it's going to take a long time for that to come back, if ever," unquote. The Chicago Tribune reporting that the Chicago Board of Education now calling the ICE raids an emergency, children being traumatized, as teachers and parents urging the school system to resume COVID-era remote learning protocols. One public school teacher telling Chicago's ABC station WLS, quote, "I marked a junior student absent, not because that student was sick, it was because ICE had snatched him on his way to school." The 17-year-old junior was detained by ICE, later released that day. After ICE conducted an immigration raid outside of Chicago's school and then raided a cafe nearby where children play, they fired tear gas. Parents and teachers say elementary school children were completely traumatized, with one saying, quote, "We have to be good or ICE will get us." The Intercept reporting that the Department of Homeland Security has begun billing unaccompanied immigrant children apprehended by ICE $5,000 each. The Intercept reporting that at least 12 teenagers in Michigan and New York who arrived in this country unaccompanied and were grabbed by ICE have been presented with bills for $5,000. The Intercept points out that these children are forbidden from working, so they have no way to make the payment. The fines are part of one big, beautiful bill signed into law back in July, which calls the fines, quote, "inadmissible alien apprehension fees." The Houston Chronicle reporting that a 16-year-old American citizen was taken by a masked ICE agent on his way to school, choked, kicked, beaten, and subjected to racial slurs. During a press conference, the 16-year-old said masked ICE agents in an unmarked vehicle pulled over a car being driven by his father on their way to school. He was taking him to school. He said the officers wore no identification, so they had no idea who these people were. So they got out of their car and began to run. They were eventually tackled in a nearby parking lot, and the 16-year-old was kicked, beaten, and subjected to racial slurs. The father is still in ICE custody. America. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Please leave a comment. I read all your comments. Hit the like button so I remain in your feed. Subscribe to my newsletter, my channel. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room for keeping the conversation civil. What else? I may do an Tuesday night election watch party. I'm thinking about it. Let me know if you would come to an election watch party on Zoom. Thank you so much for listening.